grew up in Southern California. At that time, it was a working class neighborhood. Graduated from high school, Jamesboro High School. I tried to go to college. Well, I was in the North Hollywood Draft Board area, and it was an older area. In '67, they were really cranking up the draft. And the Army's like a business. It's a corporation compared to the rest of the service. I mean, they got everything from carpenters to electricians, photography, everything. So I opted to join the Army because I figured then it's my choice what I can do, and I'm not being told. I was going through AIT infantry at Fort Gordon, Georgia. This was in '67. And this guy come in, starch fatigues, spit-shine boots, a green beret, He said, you're going to take a test. Well, so I finished AIT infantry, and all of a sudden I had orders for parachute school, jump schools, they call it. You're there about 4 weeks, and then they loaded about 10 of us on a bus. Says, you're going to Fort Bragg. And we get to Fort Bragg, and we get met, and they give us another battery test. And then afterwards, they say, you're going to be a medic. And I said, okay. So I spent the next year or so going through Special Forces medical training. Went into the 7th Special Forces Group until April '69, and then I went to the 46th Company in Thailand. And then from Thailand, I went to Vietnam. And then I went to MACSOG. And our function was two. We had hatchet forces and we had RTs. And we would go in and attack areas within Laos or Cambodia, interdict Ho Chi Minh Trail or other areas, or they would send us in there just to see what's going on in there, or prisoner snatch, or reconnaissance, or to recover pilots. When you deploy special forces with allied countries, our object is to train them how to fight, how to use weapons, and then go into combat with them if necessary as advisors. It gets our people in with allied nations troops like Mountain Yards in our case. In September of '70, there was a CIA operation going on north of Chavano. It wasn't going very well, so they wanted a demonstration south of Chavano to draw the NVA. I noticed the guys were taking more ammunition and reducing their weight load by not taking very much food. This is not sounding like it's gonna be fun. In my unit, I owned your left breast pocket. That's where I would grab the supplies. I went around to all the Americans and I made them carry extra morphine syringe. The Marines flew down in their CH-53 Cycranes and we loaded up and they flew. We moved from Kontum to Dak To, which was our launch point. And then we would head for the border. Well, by air with those things, you're about 5 minutes by the border. Well, we're still in the air a half hour later. And we flew for about 45 minutes or so. I said, holy crap. We going deep, but we didn't know it at the time, but we were basically set down in a core logistics area. We discovered that and we started blowing stuff up, burning rice, and then we identified it, and I know the Air Force came in and pounded it really heavy. So we really upset the apple cart with the NVA, and they came at us with a vengeance. And we kept moving for 4 days. We were only supposed to be in there a day and a half, but the reason we were in so long is the ground fire was driving the helicopters off, so they couldn't get in. We were so deep into Laos. They had to have permission from the ambassador to Laos, all the way up through Saigon to Singpak, all the way up to the White House to do this. In fact, that's why we used Marine Corps Cobras, because the Army Cobras at the time did not have the range that the Marine Corps Cobras had. We started taking rounds, ground fire, almost after we crossed the border. For 45 minutes, we were taking hits. You could hear it hitting the ship, rounds hitting the ship. Sounds like popcorn. When we landed, we were stepping over guys that had been hit. As the day continued on, I started collecting people, going from one guy to the next and then back again to check on them. And we had some pretty severely injured individuals. I knew I wasn't going to be able to treat them like I was taught in school. Like you get a morphine syringe, right? You're only supposed to use it on one person. You're supposed to swab it with alcohol and all that. Infection, we'll worry about that later. So I would take the morphine syringe and hit 3 guys with the same syringe right through their uniform. And I only used enough morphine on them so they could stand the discomfort, because I couldn't afford them not to be able to cooperate. And we moved constantly at night. We had Spectre above us, and they fired this gun all around us, because we had these what they call mini pounders, and so the pilot knew where we were, and they would run around us like a protective wall. I started running out of stuff at the end of the second day. On the fourth day, I was completely out of everything. Well, day 4, we were literally being charged by a battalion of NBA infantry. And the A1Es came in and just lit that CS, which is riot control gas, and they dropped that on there, and that stopped that charge, which allowed us to get to the extraction point. The first helicopter came in, and we got most of the wounded up on that. And I don't know how that thing got off the ground. It had more people in it than it was supposed to be able to fly with, but it did. That's why I'm saying that there was a guardian angel with us. The second helicopter came in. We got the rest of the wounded up at that time. Of the 136 of us, by then we were down to about 35 individuals on the ground. And we had to go back to the perimeter to defend the perimeter long enough to get that helicopter in. And then we were still some of those guys got hit. I went out and pulled, somebody got hit in the head, and threw him up on the helicopter. And by then, everybody had moved up into the helicopter, and there were 3 of us left on the ground. Myself, Adair, and McCarley. And McCarley, the great commander, is the last one of us to lift off his foot from that ground, that battlefield. The third helicopter comes in, and coming in, he loses one engine and part of his hydraulics. Pulling out, he loses the other engine and the rest of his hydraulics. He's talking to Covey, and he goes like, hey, I'm at 4,500 feet, no hydraulics, engines are both dead, we're going down. He was talking to him like he was ordering a pizza. So Bernie Bright and I are sitting in the tail, and the engine goes dead. And I'll tell you, when you're in a helicopter and that engine quits, you don't know how quiet it gets. Oh my God. And the helicopter kept going this, and you'd see the ground, then you'd see blue sky. Kept doing one of these numbers. One of us said, we're gonna crash. And Bernie says, yeah, we're arm in arm, just watching the scenery, the trees and the sky. Beautiful day, it really was. I was tapped on the shoulder, and there's some Marine captain standing there. And this Marine says, I got a wounded Marine back here. I go back up there. He'd gotten hit with a 12.5 through the neck. It just tore everything apart. And I was out everything. Somebody tells me I was asking for shirt sleeves and kerchiefs. I got his head sterilized, and I got him on all fours. And I got him to start bleeding out, because I was afraid, one, he was going to drown on his own blood. And then secondly, he was going into shock. And I didn't know what to do. So I got down near his ear and I said, listen, if you're going to die, you'd already be dead. And he came out of shock. And the next thing I know, I'm sitting on the ground looking at this big gray thing coming at me. And it was a helicopter. And so I get up and walk over to McCarley, who's sitting there. I told McCarley, that thing's on fire and we got guys in there. We got to go in there. And he said, yeah, we do. So we just trooped up into a burning helicopter and started pulling people out. So McCarley tells me later, he says, I got to think about that later. He says, that was one of the dumbest suggestions you ever made to me, or words to that effect. Let's get back on that burning helicopter. Let's go for another ride, We did get everybody out, and 1 Montagnard was killed on that crash, and 2 were killed the second day. So the one thing that bothers me to this day is the fact that when I ordered those 3 men to be left in Laos, we couldn't carry the dead. We just physically couldn't do it. Not with all the wounded we had. All of the operations that MACSOG went on were classified and weren't declassified till the late 90s. On that operation, we got the largest cache of intelligence that was ever collected in Vietnam. We so interrupted their operations that they held back almost 55,000 infantry to guard their river echelon areas, which were originally intended to go south to fight the American units. And I'm thinking, well, how many more names would be on that wall? The Distinguished Service Cross was presented to me by General Abrams. I had the Distinguished Cross, and I had that for almost 47 years until it was upgraded to the Medal of Honor in October of 2017. I mean, it was surreal. You do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, not because you're going to get rewarded, not because somebody's watching. And that's what a hero is. It's a symbol that recognizes extraordinary service, not just to the nation and the state or your city or community, but extraordinary service to the people you were with during a very serious, in many cases, catastrophic event. I wear it for all the guys that didn't come home, all the people who did some extraordinary actions that saved a lot of people's lives that never have gotten recognized for what they did. And I keep going back to the thought, and I hear others say the same thing, that if they had not done what they did, they would have failed themselves, the guys they were with, their unit, the Army, and the country. One of the things on that operation that means a lot to me, that Marine that was shot in the neck? Well, his name is Stevens, George Stevens. The man lived another 42 years. And for what I did on one afternoon, there are people walking around today. He was a father and a grandfather. And it all happened after 1970. There was one human being that has a name that I did something on one afternoon that allowed him to live another 42 years.